So I'm happy to see everybody. Happy to see everybody again. It's been a few weeks because of Pesach, and I'm grateful to see all of your wonderful faces, or pictures or names. If you don't have your faces, very happy to see everyone. This week's parsha is Tazria Mitzora, which are famously the best parshiot in the entire Torah. No, I'm just kidding. It's all about leprosy and talking about the sort of various skin conditions. There's a lot of discussions about birth and women's bodies, none of which we're really going to talk about today. We are going to talk about something that we sort of talk about as part of the Jewish world, but we don't spend much time on, which is the idea of the Mashiach, of this of a messianic figure. And so I want to, before we dig into it, and there's sort of a bunch of different selections I want to pull from today. I want to sort of define some terms, as well as as well as sort of make the link about why we're going to talk about this figure. So first of all, Mashiach, Messiah, refers to someone who has been anointed, and it definitely has sort of this sense that this person will bring a time of peace or something like that, and that there will be challenges beforehand. We'll sort of get into some of those things again, and it's not particularly focused on much in our modern Jewish era, except by certain groups, and I think one of the reasons why is an interesting tidbit about history. So, which is to say, I know I'm sort of talking in generalities, and we'll sort of dig into the details in a moment, which is that the messianic figure was certainly a part of Jewish culture for 3,000 years of some kind, and in, of course, now I'm not remembering exactly what years, there was a messianic figure, Shabtai Tzvi, who garnered a lot of attention and followers. I want to say the early 1800s, but I could be wrong. I don't want to define. I don't want to be wrong. So I'm hesitant about those years. Someone can Google it later. And who riled up a lot of people in Europe and in Russia about what type of the time of the Messiah was here. And it's my contention that when this person ultimately converted to a different religion and was not a messianic figure, the desire for broad Jewish culture to spend time on a messianic figure basically came to an end. That people were burned from the experience, and we don't talk about it much. Now, I am not going to suggest that we should be talking about it, but it is a part of our culture and part of our literary tradition, and it's interesting to explore what the rabbis say about it. So that's my sort of sporadic introduction to what we're talking about. The reason why it is relevant to this week's parsha is in part because we talk about leprosy, and we talk about, the Christians take this in very serious ways, which is not something I'm knowledgeable about, and we're not going to talk about, the relationship between a messianic figure and those who are sick and those who have leprosy. There is a relationship between those things, which is our sort of tenuous connection between the two subjects. Before we dig into the text, any questions, comments, sermons, counter sermons? Bob?
He was born in 1626.
Okay, so I was wrong off by a century or two, but even still, thank you. Any other thoughts before we dig in? Yeah, Bill.
Yeah. Counter sermon.
Eric and then Bill.
Is it really leprosy that word is talking about?
My sense is that the word we use for leprosy refers to probably a lot of things, or something in specific that may or may not be represented in the Torah. Certainly the reasoning of the Torah and the rabbis about where leprosy comes from and why it happens to particular people is not a particularly medical thing, which there is a medical illness called leprosy. So I think we can see it as a catch-all term for a variety of different things. I would remind us that the rabbis were not scientists and not doctors, and the cause and effect part of their thinking was probably different than ours.
Yeah, is the idea of a Messiah in the Torah itself, or is it in the oral Torah?
I claim no expertise, but I do believe that there is language in Nach, right, in Nevi'im and Ketuvim, that point to messianic ideas, let's say, but not in the Torah itself, in the 5 books of Moses. So that would be the distinction, and then oral Torah certainly talks about it. And some of that stuff is what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to use that as a wonderful transition to look at the text we have today.
Yeah, it's interesting from Nach, what you do have is all the ideas that from that the Christians have absorbed. Now, why did they suddenly take all those words, like Megezer Yishai, all the root from the tree and things like that? They developed it into the whole idea and related it to Jesus, which makes it in an interesting point that maybe there was talk about it, but it wasn't in the.
Yeah, I think,
Nach.
look, my expertise in Christianity is highly limited, so I am reticent to speak in any form of authority about Christianity, but it is clear that they are drawing from the same sources and coming up with different conclusions, I think, is what we can say. And you'll see in the paragraph we're about to read, this image of a messianic figure riding in on a donkey is certainly something that Christianity spends time on or has made reference to, and it appears here as well. So we can certainly say that it was in the zeitgeist at this time in one form or another. All right,
Does it appear at all in Nevi'im?
Well, so we're going to see that the quotes that the Gemara uses are pulled from Nach, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, writings and prophets, and so you'll see at least a smattering of different references. So the answer is yes, but again, I think we should remember that the rabbis are already doing some interpretation for things that are in the biblical texts that may or may not, we may not, if we were looking at it with fresh eyes, may or may not make those same conclusions, right? Okay, let's dig into it a little bit. And can I get a volunteer to read what Rabbi Alexandri says?
I'll read.
Great.
Rabbi Alexandri says, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi raises a contradiction in a verse addressing God's commitment to redeem the Jewish people. In the verse, I, the Lord, in its time, I will hasten it, from Isaiah. It is written in its time, indicating that there is a designated time for the redemption. And it is written, I will hasten it, indicating that there is no set time for the redemption. Rabbi Alexandri explains, if they merit redemption through repentance and good deeds, I will hasten the coming of the Messiah. If they do not merit redemption, the coming of the Messiah will be in its designated time.
Great. Let me pause you there, and I want to make an important distinction. So first of all, remembering that in this version of the Talmud, the bold is the translation and the not bold is the commentary in between. So the language of this section of the Talmud does not include the word Mashiach, right? It's by subtext and context that we're understanding that that's the subject. So here, certainly, and you can see, right, that the only thing that they're quoting is Be'ita, in its time, and later on, we were able to identify that this is coming from Isaiah, from context. And so again, there's a lot of reading into what's happening here. Doesn't make it wrong. Just I want you to be able to read it with those clear eyes. Okay, so here, what is it that Jackie read? Right, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi raises a contradiction between two concepts. One, that God, right, in the same verse, God will in its time bring redemption and will hasten that time. And the contradiction in the verse is, if it's in its time and it will be hastened, those seem to be conflicting ideas. And so Rabbi Alexandri comes to resolve the contradiction by saying, one part of the verse refers to meriting redemption, and in which this redemption will come at a faster rate. And if the people do not merit redemption, and we haven't talked about what meriting redemption refers to, then it will happen at a particular time in the future. So again, we're starting to get this whole section. You'll see there's pulling all sorts of different ideas. These two in particular, we're starting to get a sense that the time is fluid in some way in terms of what redemption looks like. And again, we've added the layer of the Messiah coming in, particularly because you'll see from context that that's really what we're talking about. Can I get another volunteer to read what else Rabbi Alexandri says?
Right, I'll do it. No
Please.
one else. Rabbi Alexandri says, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi raises a contradiction between two depictions of the coming of the Messiah. It is written, then there came with the clouds of heaven one like unto a son of man, and there was given to him dominion and glory and a kingdom. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. And it is written, behold, your king will come to you. He is just and victorious, lowly and riding upon a donkey and upon a colt, the foal of a donkey. Rabbi Alexandri explains, if the Jewish people merit redemption, the Messiah will come in a miraculous manner with the clouds of heaven. If they do not merit redemption, the Messiah will come lowly and riding upon a donkey. Oh boy, is this very Christian.
Well, again, it's not very Christian, right?
Christian, well, but
yes,
he's after Jesus, right? He's at least 200.
I don't think so. I think we're pulling. I think it's about as if we are reading the same book, because we are, right? The same content, but coming up with different conclusions. So yes, it feels very Christian because we live in a Christian hegemony. We live amongst Christian culture, and so these ideas are already prevalent to us through a different lens. I'm not arguing that it doesn't feel Christian, but it isn't. This is the Talmud, right? This is not very much not Christian. So here we have two things happening once again. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi raises a contradiction from the sources, and Rabbi Alexandri resolves it. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, we don't know. I'm going to add my opinion here. I think Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi has some real issues with the idea of a messianic figure, and so he's raising all sorts of problems. Well, this doesn't make sense, and this doesn't make sense, and what have you. And Rabbi Alexandri is trying to resolve it. What is his worldview here about the Jewish people and this future messianic person, place, whatever? What is his take about the nature of the Jewish people?
If they merit it, it'll come. If they don't merit it,
right. He thinks that redemption is something we merit or we don't, and the consequences will come as such. Meaning to say, if we merit redemption, it will happen soon and with tremendous miracles and glory, clouds of heaven. And if not, right, it will happen at a particular time in a lowly person riding on a donkey. Here again,
around what time do these two rabbis live?
Yeah, so Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. I imagine that these are both Amoraim, and I'll tell you why I feel that way. So first of all, Rabbi Alexandri says Amar, which tells us generally that he's coming from the Amoraim, and he's talking in Aramaic, but I could be wrong, not 100% sure, because the person he's quoting says Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi Rameh. You see that where it says Rameh? I've highlighted it. The word Rameh is an Aramaic word that means raises a contradiction. So if you're quoting someone who's speaking Aramaic, my presumption is that they're coming later as opposed to the Tanaim who only spoke Hebrew. So that means we're talking about the 200s or 300s, certainly when Christianity is coming into power. So these are conversations, and it might be that these conversations are happening because that zeitgeist, and the rabbis need to be able to defend themselves from the people around them in terms of philosophy and theology. I don't know, but certainly it is potentially one reason why this is coming up. Then we get this super interesting story here about the king of Persia who is arguing with the rabbis. Now, We don't know how true this happened in terms of really happened, but certainly the rabbis are telling this story. Can I get a volunteer? And then we're going to read the little person. Let's read the personality thing first, because those are my favorite thing. Can I, Bill, will you read for us in English here, this personality thing? You feel up to it?
Yes, move up so I can see. King Shapur. Shapur was the name of several kings of Persia. Shapur in Persian means son of the king. Here, the Talmud refers to King Shapur I, son of the founder of the Sassanid dynasty. King Shapur successfully led the Persian War against the Romans in Eretz Yisrael and the surrounding lands, conquering the city of Netzvin and extending the Persian borders as far as Syria. After several campaigns in Syria and Asia Minor, he was only emerged victorious in the Battle of Edessa, but even took the Roman Emperor Valerian into captivity, where he remained until his death. With his prisoners of war and his workforce, King Shapur constructed major cities and dams. With the kingdom, he was tolerant of other religions, and Gemara relates at the length of his relationship with the Jews and his appreciation of Jewish customs. On several occasions, the Talmud recounts his friendship with the Amora Shmuel, who, upon hearing of King Shapur, had died and exclaimed, "The bond has come undone."
Cool. And thank you for reading. And here we get a picture, a sculpture of King Shapur I. Cool. Interesting. I love it when we have this sort of layering of history and humans, and these are real humans. So King Shapur of Persia said to Shmuel mockingly, "You say that the Messiah will come on a donkey. I will send him the riding horse, a barca, a riding horse that I have." Meaning to say, this lowly person is going to come on a donkey. I'm going to provide them the Messiah a horse. Shmuel said to them, "Do you have a horse with 1,000 colors like the donkey of the Messiah? Certainly the Messiah's donkey will be miraculous." So again, we're starting to get these layers of what the rabbis are thinking about this figure, this person. Again, this is all going to get flipped on its head in just a second. So before we read ahead, maybe I'll cut off any spoilers for anyone who likes to read ahead. What have we learned so far? Let's review. What do people think about what we've read so far?
Well, it looks like the idea of a Messiah is worth investigating and might modify behavior.
Right, that if a messianic figure is part of sort of the theology or philosophy of Judaism that you claim, that there are implications, right? Which is that we have to act in a way that perhaps might merit that figure's return. Is that what you're saying, Jackie?
Yeah.
Great. I think that's a great takeaway.
Yeah.
Sheila, I saw you, and then Bill.
Well, King Shapur is mock. In other words, he certainly doesn't go for this idea of Messiah. And Shmuel, I mean, they're having fun with the whole idea. Shmuel and Shapir. They're both saying this is a crazy idea, and they're trying to, they're making it into a joke.
Yeah,
Well,
I think
the
Yeah,
king
sorry,
wouldn't
Jackie.
like it anyway, because that would establish somebody with power greater than his.
That's true.
Yeah, there's definitely a power piece of this here. I think also, I mean, even if Shmuel is sort of responding in a relatively serious way, we are getting a sense that this figure is someone who is going to sort of bend the laws of nature, right? Is going to have a donkey that has 1,000 colors, right? I'm imagining what comes to mind is like sort of those cartoonish depictions of unicorns in my head, right? With like rainbow tails and stuff, with like kids' toys. That's sort of the image that comes to my mind. Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, this is around 300 is what you said. So people at that time didn't think that Jesus was the Messiah. Does that come afterwards?
Well, my understanding, again, limited as it is, that around 300 is when Rome took Christianity as its core religion.
I thought that was due to a proclaim of some king of Turkey or something. I forget the guy's name, but who started,
Constantine.
what?
Constantine.
Constantine, yeah. That was Turkey, right? And
I thought
Yeah.
that was Rome.
No, I think Constantine was still Rome.
what? Constantine was Rome? Okay.
But here we're already, again, with our King Shapur as our context here, right? That the King Shapur of Persia is in conflict with Rome. So again, we are amidst this time period where lots of things are happening, right? Where Rome is changing the land of Israel is changing hands, and there's lots of war and battle and things are happening where between these nation states or nations or kingdoms, empires, whatever term you want to use. And certainly power and religion and respecting local religions has different weights, right? Romans less than Persians, the Persian Empire being much more comfortable, at least from this note, with local religion that perhaps Rome was not. Okay, let's look ahead, unless somebody has something else they want to say. Okay. Of course, what kind of conversation would we have about Mashiach if we didn't have one with Elijah as well? Can I get a volunteer to read the story of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who certainly has lots of opinions on the Mashiach? Anybody want to read for us? Yeah, Nelson. And then Eric, the next one.
Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said to Elijah, "When will the Messiah come?" Elijah said to
Oh,
him,
wait a sec. Sorry.
Skipped a paragraph.
"Oh, I'm sorry."
It's okay.
Rabbi
I'm so
Yeshua ben
excited to hear
Levi
what
found
Rabbi Yeshua
Elijah the prophet, who was standing at the entrance of the burial cave of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said to him, "Will I be privileged to come to the world to come?" Elijah said to him, "If this master, the Holy One, blessed be he, will wish it so." Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, "Two I saw, Elijah and me, and the voice of three I heard, as the divine presence was also there, and it was in reference to him that Elijah said, 'If this master will wish it so.'"
Right. I'm going to pause you. Right. So, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi finds Elijah standing at the cave of the burial cave of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Right. Shimon bar Yochai famously was fleeing Roman power, had buried himself to his neck, had laser eyes, if people know those stories. And the Zohar is attributed to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. I hear Ben Yochai, but it's the same thing. So that's his context. So Elijah is standing at the entrance of the burial cave. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi comes to him and says, "Will I be privileged to come to the world to come?" Right. And here we know that he's an Amora because he says, "Atena la alma ta'ate." Atena, will I come? La alma, to the world, ta'ate, that comes. Right. That's Aramaic. Right. And in Hebrew we would say, Haveti or Aviti, la Olam Haba, right? Something along those lines. And Rabbi Elijah says, Im yirtze Adon Hazeh, this master. So the question, the editor of the Gemara, or Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, however, which way you want to think about it, is saying, why is Elijah saying this? And Rabbi Yeshua says, I saw Elijah and myself, and the voice I heard was the third person referenced by Hazeh, by this voice. That's what Rabbi Steinsaltz here is explaining. Okay, Eric, why don't you read this next paragraph?
All right, starting with Rabbi Yehoshua.
Yep.
Ben Levi said to Elijah, "When will the Messiah come?" Elijah said to him, "Go ask him." Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi asked, "And where is he sitting?" Elijah said to him, "At the entrance of the city of Rome." Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi asked him, "And what is his identifying sign by means of which I can recognize him?" Elijah answered, "He sits among the poor who suffer from illnesses, and all of them untie their bandages and tie them all at once. But the Messiah unties one bandage and ties one at a time. He says, perhaps I will be needed to serve to bring about the redemption. Therefore, I will never tie more than one bandage so that I will not be delayed."
Okay, so here we're starting to get a little bit more into the story. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says to Elijah, right? Again, when will the Mashiach come? And here we very much have a specific reference to the Mashiach. It's not an intimation or in the commentary. He says it specifically. When will the Mashiach come? And here, honestly, when I was reading this, it's like, this is not the answer I anticipated, which is Elijah says, go ask him. Go to the guy who we've acclaimed as Mashiach, or is claiming, or what have you, and figure it out. And here, the description is this person who's sitting amongst the poor, who is tying and untying one bandage instead of all of them. I have to admit, I don't totally understand what this image is and refers to. But Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's response is, I might be needed for redemption, and I don't want to slow it down, so I'm only going to tie one bandage, which is an interesting takeaway, I'll admit. I'm not sure that I totally get it, but it's certainly the case. And so here we're getting a sense, and we're about to get to when Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi goes and encounters the Mashiach, we have this encounter. So again, pulling what we've said here, we've got these contradictions about who this Mashiach will be. We have this sense that Mashiach will come in the future and bring redemption. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who's encountering Elijah without any real fanfare, wants to know if I will be, if Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi wants to know, am I going to make it to the world to come? And it sort of goes on this quest. Let's see how this story continues. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi went to the Messiah. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said to the Messiah, greetings to you, shalom alecha, Rabbi umori, my rabbi and my teacher. And the Mashiach responds, greetings to you, shalom alecha, bar Levi. Greetings to you, bar Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said to him, when will the master come? The Mashiach said to him, today. Sometime later, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi came to Elijah. Elijah said to him, what did the Messiah say to you? He said to him, shalom alecha bar Levi. Greetings to you, bar Levi. Elijah said to him, the Mashiach thereby guaranteed that you and your father will enter the world to come. As, and Rabbi Steinsaltz is explaining, because the Mashiach greeted Yeshua ben Levi, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi with shalom. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said to Elijah, the Messiah lied to me, as he said to me, I am coming today, and he did not come. Elijah said to him, this is what he said to you. He said that he will come today if you will listen to his voice. And I'm assuming his refers to God from the book of Psalms. So here we're starting to get a little bit more of the picture, which is Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi encounters this person that Elijah directs him towards. They have this encounter, and nothing really happens. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi later on encounters Elijah and says, what's going on here? And what is Elijah's response? It's actually in line with what I think Jackie, you said, which is, there's some action that needs to happen here, and ostensibly, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi didn't do it. I think this story is admittedly a little wacky, but I do think we're starting to get a sense of what the rabbis are thinking about this figure, and clearly, on some level, is existing in parallel with them. Yeah, Bob.
Is Elijah the Messiah?
No. Elijah is known to be sort of the. Let me back up. Elijah never dies. In Tanakh, we're told that Elijah is taken up in a sort of fiery chariot up to God, and what we understand, it's probably in a Gemara somewhere, that Elijah comes to be sort of the messenger, the harbinger of a messianic figure or age to come. And so
I don't understand the first sentence.
This one?
Yeah.
Right. So Elijah, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi goes to Elijah and says, when will this third figure, the Mashiach, come? And this direction is, and Elijah says, can I go? Where is he? Can I go there? And Elijah says, yes. And this is how you're going to know who it is. And so then he goes. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi goes to the gates of Rome, ostensibly, to encounter this person. And when the result is, when will the master come? When will God come? Ostensibly, again, we don't really know who exactly master is being referred to here. I think God makes the most sense. And the Messiah says, today, that figure, nothing happens. That today comes and goes, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi doesn't have, there's no interaction, there's nothing that happens. And so later on, he comes to Elijah to say, you know, what's going on here? And Elijah's response is, you didn't listen to this messianic figure's voice. And that's why the today thing didn't happen. You with me?
Me, it sounds like it's.
Waiting
hold
for
on
the
a second.
Messiah to come and he's already here.
Yeah, that I'm confused by the same thing.
Yeah, I think it's confusing. Like, I don't think you've missed anything. I think you understand what has happened in this text correctly, which is, what does it mean for this messianic figure to come and yet already be there? And
Right.
my understanding is, Sheila, I see you, is that the figure, I think, this is my understanding, which is that the messianic figure and the messianic age are connected, but are not the same. That's how I'm understanding this. I don't know.
The Messiah is a real person, or is this somebody who's an imagination?
According to the story, a real person.
I think that this is a sarcastic comment about Jesus, who the people consider him the Messiah. In other words, they're making fun of it. Okay, you're the Messiah, so why aren't you here? You haven't listened to my voice. And it's I mean, I guess you have to read the rest of it, but it sounds very sarcastic to me, because we've seen this before in the Talmud, that they make these comments, they play with each other. The rabbis play with each other. It's like, as I said, it's like they have nothing else to do, so they make these comments to each other. For example, the reference to tying the bandages. This is Jesus. Jesus was healing the sick and doing things like that. So that in some way he's, I think, making fun.
Right. Your read is that this person they're talking about doesn't really do the thing that is promised, and they're sort of poking fun at that, right? Like, oh, this figure who has come to already is sitting in Rome, but nothing's really happened.
And it's
Right.
also interesting, the whole idea of the washing of the feet of the Pope. I mean, this is all a theme that's
right. We're
running.
Definitely pulling from the same sources.
Yeah.
Bill, Nelson, and then David.
No, I was just making a comment. I was really confused. If Messiah is Jesus, Jesus has been dead for a couple of 100 years already.
Yeah. So the rabbis do reference Jesus a few times in the Talmud. It's not clear that this one is. I think, Sheila, your read is reasonable, but I don't think it's the only read. Bill, does that help?
No, I'm still confused, but I'll skip it for now.
Yeah, I think your confusion is real and reasonable, because I don't think this is a linear story very well. Like, this is not a story we would tell today and expect everyone to understand, because I don't think it's obvious what this is saying. So I think your confusion is shared, right? You're not alone in it. Nelson and then David.
I'm confused about who was the Messiah lied. That to me is the clearest evidence of Sheila's interpretation. But also, I think there's kind of a metaphysical point. What does it mean to say that the Messiah has come? Does it mean that the world's been transformed, or that he's working, or she's working?
Yeah, I don't. From this text alone, it's not clear. The rest of there's a bunch of stuff that we're not going to get to today, because there's one other thing I for sure want to show you. But this whole page or 2 pages is around this question. Again, we're really just getting a taste of it. But I don't think. I think you're right that the lying piece here is good evidence for Sheila's point. But I think the question of how this all works is obvious. It's obvious to me that it's not clear, for lack of a better way of putting that, right? Like, I don't think they fully understand how this all is supposed to put together, and we're not being told exactly, here is how this works. We're really just getting sort of like snapshots of the process. David.
So I apologize, I'm on a phone today, so it takes me a little longer to respond. I wanted to point out that this particular Talmudic story actually appears in, I believe it's in the Harlow Machzor, under one of the reflections, which is designed to say that the meaning of the story, although it's only excerpted there, so parts of it that may be a little more disturbing and that Sheila's pointing out aren't in the Harlow excerpt. But the point that they're trying to make in the Harlow Machzor is that if Mashiach is actually here all the time in every age, somebody is designated potentially to be that person, but they haven't come, it's because we didn't bring him. And so for purposes of the Machzor, the idea is, in a sense, if only everybody would behave, then we'd have Mashiach. And whether that means an age or literally somebody who's rebandaging one at a time to make sure he's not delayed is perhaps purposefully obscure. But at least from the point of view of what I remember from the Harlow Machzor, it's a kind of a beautiful story because it says something about this tension between, does Mashiach just come and we don't know when, and it's whenever the right time is from the point of view of God, or does our behavior help bring Mashiach? And needless to say, the Machzor comes down on the side, and I think the story sort of does also, on the side of the behavior of people, and maybe specifically Jews, but maybe everyone, says something about when we're either in a messianic age or Mashiach comes, or maybe that's the same thing.
Well, I did not know this story was in the Harlow. I happen to really like the Harlow Machzor. Personally, it's the one with the purple trim and the colors are purple. And so I think that's a really nice way of looking at it, which is the distinction between the Messiah being present versus the Messiah sort of enacting the messianic age, and those being not exactly the same. So I'm really glad you added that. The whole rest of the page of the Talmud continues this question. We're not going to read it all now. Here, the same figure is known as the son of David, and other kinds of things. Whereas the sign, place, different kinds of things, place coffin deep in the ground. It won't come until the Roman kingdom. Blah blah blah. Let the Messiah. All sorts of interesting things. And then I found this particular section interesting as well. Just to get a sense that the rabbis were not of one mind on this. Ula, who I'm going to give you a little background. Ula was famously a rabbi who would travel back and forth between Babylonia and Eretz Israel and would bring teachings back and forth, helping sort of link the communities. So it's that, to me, always whenever Ula is quoted, I'm always thinking about that. So he's sort of like in lots of different places, pulling from lots of different places. And so he says, let the Messiah come, but after my death, so that I will not see the Messiah, as I fear the suffering that will precede the Messiah's coming. Now here, again, this is Rabbi Steinsaltz here, but we certainly can get a sense, right? Which is that Ula wants the Messiah to come, but not when he's around. Likewise, Rabbah says, a different rabbi, let the Messiah come, but after my death, so that I will not see him, right? So Rabbah and Ula like the idea of Messiah, not interested in being in the same place at the same time. Rav Yosef says, let Messiah come, and I will be privileged to sit in the shadow of his donkey's excrement. I'm willing to undergo all the...
This is also some sarcasm in this.
Certainly
I see it as being sarcastic. In other words, why should I suffer for him? and the other one in the donkey's excrement. I mean, in other words,
It's certainly
you
really,
don't
really
refer to the Messiah and then talk about the donkey's excrement. This is not honorable.
Yeah, so I think we're certainly getting two things. One is different worldviews about how this messianic figure, what our relationship with this figure should be. One view here is great, but I don't want to be here for it. And Rav Yosef, if we take it more literally, which is Rav Yosef is willing to go through the pains and suffering, you know, metaphorically represented by the shadow of the donkey's excrement, that it will take. I want to be here for it, is what Rav Yosef is saying. If Rav Yosef is being sarcastic, as you suggest, certainly a reasonable potential understanding of this, right? Like, yeah, like, okay, it's gonna suck, and like, yeah, I'll be privileged to experience it, right?
Too bad we don't have what do you call again, punctuation.
Right, we definitely don't have punctuation. So it's interesting, again, like what I found interesting about this particular page, and we're coming to the section I think that more directly relates to our section. The rabbis are not of one mind. And here we get a little bit more. Abaye says to Rabbah, what is the reason you are so concerned? Meaning to say, Rabbah was of the opinion that he doesn't want to be around. If we say it's due to the pains and that precede and accompany the coming of the Mashiach, but isn't it taught that Rabbi Elazar's student asked Rabbi Elazar, what shall a person do to be spared from the pains of the preceding of the coming of the Mashiach? Rabbi Elazar said to them, they shall engage in Torah study and acts of kindness, gemilut chasadim. Abaye continued, as far as the master is concerned, isn't there the Torah and aren't there acts of kindness that you performed? Meaning to say, if Rabbah, what you're concerned about is that the world will be in chaos and pains and struggles, like, don't worry. Rabbi Elazar has a teaching, which is, if you study Torah and you are kind and you engage in acts of kindness, you're not going to experience those pains. And as far, right, and this is where Abaye does be a little sarcastic, is I think very clearly being sarcastic, like, don't you have Torah and acts of kindness? What are you worried about? Right? If Rabbi Elazar is right, you've got nothing to worry about. Abaye says to him, I am concerned lest sin cause me to suffer the pain despite the Torah study and good deeds in which I engage, in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi. As Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi raises a contradiction, it is written that God said to Jacob, I am with you and I keep you wherever you go. And it is written, Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. If God assured Jacob that God would keep him, why was Jacob concerned? Meaning to say, I think Rabbah has a very, so far, a very honest reflection of human nature. Sure, I'd study Torah and I do good things, but also, you know, I'm a human and I've done wrong things. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi explains, Jacob was afraid lest sin on his part cause the assurance to be abrogated, meaning to say, Jacob's problematic actions undo the good things that he had done, as it was taught in a variety of regard to the verse, until your people pass over, Lord, until your people whom you have acquired pass over, from Exodus. Until your people pass over, Lord, this is a reference to the first entry into the land led by Joshua. Until your people whom you acquired pass over, this is a reference to the second entry into the land when they returned from Zion from Babylonian, which is much later in history. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi explains, say from now, based on the statement that the Jewish people were worthy for God to perform a miracle on their behalf in the second entry of the land, that was like miracles are performed during the exodus from Egypt in the first entry of the land, but sin caused the second entry to take place in an unremarkable manner, with the Jewish people being subject to the dominion of non-Jews. I don't want to get too deep into this, but the point being is, the rabbis were not of one mind about what the implications would be, whether this was good or bad, or what the challenges would be. To me, it calls out that there's this real sense that human nature is such that nobody's perfect. And we're all, you know, in the moment when God judges us, we're all getting judged. There's all sorts of stuff here going on that you can read later, that we can read. There's one particular story that I wanted to point you to. Here we can see Jewish people are destined to eat from bounty. I mean, there's really a lot of stuff in here that, more than we were.
What was that, Rabbi Sheila? Oh, Simlai.
It could be Rabbi Sheila if you want it to be. There was one more page. There's one more thing I wanted to point to you. Of course, now I'm not going to find it. Here they're talking about the length of the Messianic era. Again, I brought a lot more stuff here than I thought we were going to bring. There's all sorts of prophecies about it. Of course, I'm not going to be able to find it now. Okay, I'm not going to worry about it now. If people want, I can drop a link. Maybe I'll do that. If people want to look into this more, I'm going to pull up a link and you can take a look at it at your own pace. What do people think about this sort of crazy? I mean, generally speaking, I try and give you something a little bit more contained, but there's a lot here. What do people think about at least the sections that we read?
Narishkeit.
I'm shocked by your
Sorry.
response, Sheila.
Yeah,
Shocked. Yeah, right. I mean, let me also be clear, because this is why I started the way I did, which is we live in an era, right? Bob gave gave us the right dates, right? Of in the shadow of a false Messiah, Shabtai Tzvi. And I think that made a real break in Jewish culture that ripped out the idea of messianism from our culture. Like, I think it really, I don't want to say harmed, because I don't mean it to be that, but I mean, like, that experience to the Jewish people made a break in which, as Jews, we again, broad strokes here, there's certainly many Jews who have strong feelings about the Messianic age, and they should feel whatever they want, but that our general broad Jewish culture does not spend a ton of time in about messianism, in part because I think of that history with Shabtai Tzvi. And so I think your response, Sheila, although admittedly that's how you encounter lots of this stuff, which is fine.
Yeah.
I do think that as Jews, we are very wary of conversations about the Messiah, which is why I thought it would be so interesting today. The section I was trying to find, I couldn't find it, was about the Messianic person and the lepers. And leprosy was this week's parsha, and there's a connection there. But I think it's an interesting set of questions. Yeah, Nelson.
But the Lubavitchers have brought it back into at least parts of Orthodox culture, and it's impressed, I think, a lot of non-Orthodox culture. So I hear people saying they want Mashiach now, and so on, and some people even saying that the late Lubavitcher Rebbe was the Mashiach, and they say it without irony, because he died.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's sort of why I was hedging my language, which is there are certainly parts of the Jewish world that take messianism incredibly seriously. And I don't want to negate that. It's part of our tradition. But I do think the vast majority of Jews are, not that they don't care, but that they've relegated that type of messianic thinking to be a much smaller part of Judaism. And I think I'm making a claim that it's the Shabtai Tzvi thing. But the rabbis in the Gemara don't spend a ton of time on it either. We're getting a lot of it in this one particular section, but you're absolutely right that Chabad is one example. There's certainly others in which the messianic figures, whether it was Schneerson or not, certainly play a pretty serious role. But I think most of Jewish tradition is not spending a lot of real intellectual energy or emotional energy on a messianic person or age. That's certainly my take on it. But you're right. It's not like it's gone.
I want to just defend myself or whatever. I'm being sarcastic about, some of the things that are said and done. And yet the fact that they actually delve into all these problems are what interesting, that they can talk about something like this and they're not, while they may be sarcastic, they are trying to understand it. And then so that they can get rid of it. And that's been a lot of the things, that we've been doing. I mean, they did a great, look, it's like doing crossword puzzles. I find Talmud is like crossword puzzles. You're trying to figure out why something is an issue.
Yeah, I want to say two things. One, I think you are right in the sense that the rabbis are not afraid to pick apart an idea. They're not taking this at blind
Right,
faith.
they're not afraid.
Certainly not. And I wouldn't say that the entirety of what, again, there was so much more we didn't read today, and I put it in the chat for those people who want to look into it more. I wouldn't say that the rabbis were rejecting this out of hand. I think that would be an unfair characterization. Certainly some of them are going to care more than others. But the rabbis were, this was a thing for them to deal with. And by the way, there are other things like this in our tradition, like resurrection, Mechayeh HaMeitim, which, we say at the Amidah, traditional liturgy says in the Amidah 3 times a day. That's something, worthy of investigation with the same sort of rigor that the rabbis are doing here. So, that's this. It's also, again, interrelated with this question of messianic person and age. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Nelson.
Well, I don't know. I have this feeling, this sort of gut feeling. I don't want to play games with Christianity. And one of the ways you play games with Christianity is adopt all their craziness, but pretend it's Jewish. Now, I don't mean Jews for Jesus, but sort of like, well, it's really Jewish stuff, and we're okay with it too. I think we're developing another religion that is not anti-Christian, but is non-Christian.
Yeah, I mean, the rabbis don't spend a tremendous amount of energy on the various forms of Christianity that they encounter, unless they're basically forced to, right? Where we have lots of periods throughout Jewish history where disputations are happening, in which Jews are sort of provided as are forced to defend Judaism and the faiths of Christianity. I wouldn't say that I do think that the rabbis have their own set of views on these things, and they are, because Christianity has shared, Venn diagram, shared sources here that we're pulling from the same places. But I don't think the rabbis are accepting Christian views on this by any stretch of the imagination, and we should be careful also of not adopting Christian ideas about rabbinic texts, because that would be certainly anachronistic. Would you say that's fair, Nelson? Yeah.
Yeah, and I because I spent many years studying philosophy, and as I studied Judaism, I began realizing how Christian the philosophy was that I studied. It was never labeled Christian, but it had the structure, I would say the architecture of Christianity, and the ideas fit into that framework. Putting them into a Jewish framework is another task.
Yes, I think look, we have lived in a Christian hegemonic world, which assumes Christianity as the norm, and lots of our collective thinking is impacted by that. And so it is good. It's one of the reasons why I love Gemara. It's really, I think it's good to make sure that we root ourselves in our tradition, in order to be consistent in our thinking and be rooted in Judaism. There's a fantastic book which I have under my stack of Haggadahs here, the very bottom one, which is called The Rabbinic Mind by Max Kedushin. And it's a really deep dive into sort of I don't want to say first principles, because I don't think Judaism functions that way. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, but it has a number of really interesting, like how does Judaism function type of questions, or rabbinic Judaism, without sort of delving into the Christian context in which much of us have lived. With that ending, I think we're gonna end our class today. I hope that you were you all enjoyed this interesting diversion into early rabbinic messianism. Again, we just got a taste. There's obviously way more here that we didn't talk about, I look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a
Yasher koach.